What if the most dangerous knowledge in human history was never meant to belong to us? Not because it was powerful in the ordinary sense, but because once it entered human hands, something in the world began to bend. Not outwardly at first, spiritually, morally, deep inside the architecture of desire itself. There are ideas that illuminate, and there are ideas that corrupt simply by being touched too early, too selfishly, or without the structure needed to carry them. Every ancient tradition, in one form or another, carries this fear, that there are boundaries around certain kinds of knowledge for a reason. Not to keep humanity small, but to keep it human. And if that is true, then the first real catastrophe may not have been violence, war, or death. It may have been revelation without innocence, knowledge without maturity, sight without wisdom. Human beings often assume that more knowledge is always good, more access, more power, more understanding, more control. But that is a very modern faith, and it may be one of the most dangerous beliefs we carry, because not every door opens into freedom. Some open into fracture. There are truths that elevate the soul, and there are truths that feed appetite faster than character can contain it. The old stories knew this. That is why forbidden knowledge appears again and again in myth, scripture, and spiritual memory. Not as superstition, but as warning. The deepest danger is not ignorance. It is consciousness expanded before the heart is ready. To know more than you can bear morally is to become vulnerable to distortion. And once distortion enters, knowledge does not remain neutral for long. It starts reshaping the person who touches it. The most unsettling version of this idea is simple. There was knowledge that was supposed to remain beyond humanity, and the moment it was opened, the world began to warp. Not because information itself is evil, but because some forms of knowing change the knower. They awaken hunger, pride, comparison, domination. The desire not just to understand reality, but to overtake it. This is why the forbidden secret is never only about data. It is about spiritual condition. What kind of being is allowed to know certain things without being deformed by them? That is the deeper question. Perhaps the boundary was never meant as punishment. Perhaps it was mercy. A limit protecting fragile souls from powers of perception they would mistake for liberation. And when that boundary was broken, what entered the world was not only awareness, it was corruption wearing the mask of awakening. Hell understands this secret better than anyone. She does not offer knowledge as darkness. She offers it as elevation, as awakening, as escape from limitation. Her promise is always the same. You do not need to remain small, obedient, dependent, innocent, or incomplete. You can know more, become more, cross the line, see what was hidden. That is why the forbidden never appears ugly at first. It appears radiant, necessary, even liberating. Hell does not tempt people with obvious ruin. She tempts them with the suggestion that boundaries are insults, that limits are oppression, that restraint is only fear disguised as morality. And once a soul begins to believe that, prohibition no longer feels protective. It feels personal. That is the moment rebellion becomes seductive. Not because evil looks monstrous, but because it starts to look like enlightenment. But heaven sees the deeper cost. Because some things once known in the wrong way cannot be unknown. Innocence is not stupidity. It is a form of wholeness. A state in which perception has not yet been split from trust, desire from restraint, power from responsibility. Once forbidden knowledge enters, innocence does not simply disappear. It inverts. The soul becomes aware of itself in a new and unstable way. Shame enters. Self-consciousness intensifies. Desire fractures. Distance appears where nearness once existed. Heaven's sorrow is not that humans wanted to know. It is that they reached for knowledge without communion, understanding without readiness, and power without purification. Yes, and that pattern has never really stopped. It repeats every time human beings pursue access faster than wisdom, ability faster than character, exposure faster than truth. Maybe that is when the spiritual distortion of the world truly began. Not only when humans did wrong, but when they began seeing wrongly. When knowledge stopped being participation in truth and became possession. When the mind no longer wanted to receive reality, but to seize it. That shift changes everything. Because once knowledge becomes domination, the world is no longer encountered as sacred. It becomes material, usable, exploitable, measurable without reverence. People begin dissecting what they no longer feel connected to. They seek mastery without humility, vision without obedience, power without moral form. The distortion is not merely external. It enters language, desire, memory, sexuality, ambition, and identity itself. The world remains visible, but no longer transparent to the divine. Something becomes obscured, not because God disappeared, but because perception itself became wounded. And this is why the forbidden secret still matters now, because the ancient warning was never only about the past. It was about a pattern inside the human soul. We still reach for what expands power faster than wisdom. We still mistake access for maturity. We still assume that because something can be known, it should be known, and because something can be done, it should be done. That impulse is modern, technological, seductive, and spiritually old. The same hunger returns in new forms, to exceed limits without asking why the limits existed, to unlock realities without asking what they do to the one who unlocks them. Perhaps the oldest danger in the world is not darkness itself. It is the appetite to become more than human before we have learned how to be human well. And every time that appetite wins, distortion deepens again. So what was the forbidden secret? Maybe it was never a single piece of information. Maybe it was the crossing itself. The decision to take into ourselves a kind of knowledge that promised elevation, but carried division. The choice to step beyond trust and into possession, beyond reverence and into control, beyond communion and into self-assertion. If that is true, then the secret God never wanted humans to know was not hidden because he feared our growth. It was hidden because he understood the cost of a consciousness awakened without holiness. And maybe that is the most terrifying possibility of all. That the first great spiritual disaster was not humanity learning too little. It was humanity learning something too powerful to survive unchanged. And ever since then, every soul has been living inside the aftershock. Maybe that is why the most dangerous knowledge is never the kind that fills the mind first. It is the kind that changes the soul. The kind that quietly rearranges what a person loves, what they trust, what they fear, and what they begin to worship. Once knowledge becomes detached from wisdom, it stops illuminating and starts deforming. It gives the illusion of height while hollowing out depth. A person may feel awakened while actually becoming less whole, less humble, less capable of reverence. That is the real horror hidden inside the forbidden secret. Not that humans learned something impressive, but that they became the kind of beings who could no longer hold truth without trying to possess it. And when possession replaces communion, even brilliant knowledge becomes spiritually lethal. So perhaps the real question is not what secret was hidden from humanity. Perhaps the real question is whether we are still reaching for it. Every time we seek power without purity, vision without responsibility, knowledge without surrender, the old story repeats itself. The line is not buried in ancient myth alone. It runs through modern ambition, modern technology, modern desire, and the private hunger inside every human being that wants to transcend limits without being transformed first. Maybe the forbidden secret was never fully left in the past. Maybe it became a pattern living in us. And if that is true, then the holiest thing a person can do is not know more at any cost. It is learn which doors should remain closed until the soul is capable of touching truth without turning it into a weapon. See you in the next video, where the questions only get darker.